Thank you very much. I think one of the frustrations that I and many others have shared on this committee is that since the 5 years after the run on Northern Rock in the UK, years after Lehman Brothers, we've had all this legislation, and I know there have been varying levels of support for all this financial defence legislation that's gone through this committee, but we actually haven't tackled the fundamental problem, which, as Arlene said, if a bank went bust tomorrow, it would still want taxpayers to bail it out. That should have been job number one, and I think it's very frustrating that we've waited this long to try and resolve this issue rather than resolving it right at the beginning. And I think we have to say, as much as possible, I know it's politically difficult when a government is in power and a bank fails and there are jobs, but as much as possible we have to be explicit: no more taxpayer bailout. And there is quite a lot of support across the political spectrum on that. If you ask someone on the free market liberal right like me, you'd say you want markets to work. Why should failing institutions be bailed out with taxpayers' money? My friends on the left say to me, why are you throwing all this taxpayers' money at rich bankers? It's not fair. And therefore there is a high level of, we may be coming from different angles, but there's a high level of consensus across the political spectrum: as much as possible, no taxpayer bailout. But that means when a bank fails that we have an orderly procedure for winding down the banks. That means transfer of customers, transfer of deposits, maybe fire sales, but at the same time we make sure the payment system can continue to work and ATMs can continue to work so people can carry on paying their bills and taking out their money. Because if they don't, you will get civil unrest. But it is not beyond the wit of man to devise a proper winding down structure for failing institutions. And we've got to get away from this idea of too big to fail. When you talk to banks and you ask the CEOs of various banks from different countries, you get different answers. The CEO of a large British bank said to me, well, the problem is we're not very good at talking to each other. When I've asked them, why have you not come up with your own proposals? I had a CEO of an Austrian bank that said to me, I'm sorry, but you've just got to accept some of our banks are too big to fail. Well, I'm sorry, that is unacceptable. I had a CEO of a big German bank say to me, well, do you think we like to be bailed out by taxpayers' money? Well, so what? That's not the answer. The answer is we have to, as much as possible, be explicit: no more taxpayer bailout. But of course, at the same time, we have this procedure. The second issue I think we should look at is director liability. Because if directors, one of the things that also unites us across the political spectrum is that no one has really taken responsibility for the poor management of their banks. And one of the areas I would like to see more work focus on is director liability. Under a partnership model, directors are directly liable. How much can we push that? Is that unrealistic? Or maybe some sort of halfway house where you may ensure that directors are exposed to bonds in their own institutions or some of the other proposals that are on the table to make sure that they pay the price. I don't mind that if a bank performs well, serves its customers in a competitive market and makes profits, that the directors earn good bonuses. But what I am against is when they fail and they still earn good bonuses. That is not accountable, and I think that's one of the things that we share. The third thing, I think, really, is accounting standards. It's technical, it's geeky, people shy away from it, but we've got to look at the role that IFRS and accounting standards have played in all this. I have no real objection if people want to put CDOs and CDSs on their balance sheet, particularly investment banks rather than the retail bank. But what you've got to make sure is if that instrument blows up, that the bank has the money put aside, what you used to call loss provisioning and prudence, that if it blows up, they have the money put aside to pay for that loss or to pay for their exposure. We got into a position with AIG, well not we, but the AIG financial products got into a position where it was exposed to $2.8 trillion. There is no way that it could have made any provision for that losses or sufficient provision for that losses. And accounting standards allowed it to do that because we've moved away from prudence. In the old days, you did not book a profit or revenue until you actually made that revenue or accrue that revenue, but you made sure you put enough money aside for potential losses. We've gone the other way round, where you don't declare a loss until you actually see it or hit it, but you book your profits up front. We've allowed accounting standards to take us that way, and many people on the buy side say to me they do not trust banks' balance sheets and they think that banks are not going concerns, and they actually have to do their own analysis of banks when it comes to that. And the other thing about that is when it comes to auditing. Once again, very sort of geeky, technical, people shy away from it. But auditing has got to a stage where it's a box-ticking exercise. It is no longer auditors exercising professional scepticism. So when they see numbers in front of them, they don't challenge the audit committee or the banks and say to them, why have you got that higher number rather than that lower number, or the other way round? They just say, oh, don't worry, you've met the procedure, tick the box, you're fine. And what happens? We've seen organisations, not just banks, fail after being given a clean bill of health. We need to see more professional scepticism when it comes to auditing. And the last thing I think is actually, just generally, most people think when they put their money in a bank that that money is on deposit. That money is not on deposit for most people. They actually lend their money to the bank, and the bank lends it out at a higher rate in order to pay them some sort of interest. I would like to see some basic transparency in banking, that when you put your money in a bank, the bank tells you whether it's on deposit or whether it's actually being loaned out. So, in fact, you're lending to a bank not to put in deposit. And maybe the opportunity is there to actually have a proper deposit account, so it's safer than putting your money under your mattress. But you may not get any interest on it, but you know that that money is on deposit and it's being looked after, and after a certain time you will get access to that money, rather than relying on deposit guarantee schemes or whatever. Those, I know, are some very sort of simple, wide ideas, but I think if we had tackled these issues and addressed these issues very early on, maybe we'd all have a lot more confidence in the banking sector. But I think we all share this across the spectrum. I think we share many of the views that the rapporteur expressed in her opening remarks, and I look forward to working with the rapporteur and the other shadows.